Welcome. Welcome to this corner of Yorkshire, almost Lancashire, just across the River Aire from Skipton, and a village that I've known very well for, let's say, since 1981. In fact, before then, when my parents came up here to Lanehead in 1976. And this evening, when I was asked to give a talk, I was quite preoccupied with the fact that I'm doing quite a lot of work over in Skipton, and I've done a lot of work elsewhere, but I'm behindhand with the amount of material that there is around on Carlton itself. So I took the plunge and said, right, I'll talk about not sort of general history, but I'll talk about particular buildings that intrigued and interested me, and various members of our archive group as well. And I chose three buildings. And so we have a full set of slides to get through, images, starting with this view down the main street. And I can say to start with that you won't see any of these buildings. I'm going to take the three. Just a minute. There we are. Perhaps you know the village, perhaps not. This is the 1850 map. Incidentally, the way I do a presentation, I tend to do lots of aide-memoire jottings onto the screen. There are one or two screens that are going to be packed with text, for which I apologise, and quite a lot of them were just brief views. And I'm hoping you can make out my my little arrow. So here's Carlton Village, and the three buildings we're going to look at today are the Old Hall, the top blue arrow in the picture, followed by the Endowed Arms House, as it's shown here in 1850, the hospital, now known as Spence's Court. And then we're going to trot back across the village and look at a building that I'm describing as a hidden building, with masses of questions still to ask about it. And I'm going to touch on what we all know nowadays as heritage significance. It's come to be just a term that refers to so many aspects of a building, its history, the people, the social history, the economic history, and so on. So there's going to be quite a mix of sources and descriptions as I work my way through. So the previous map was 1850. This is a map of Carlton. I hope you're getting a picture, for those that don't know the village, of this distinctive through route from Skipton across the river and coming through, and then right out to Lancashire, to Colne, a very important through route, which I'll refer to again. And then two pathways or routes, one following the line of Carlton Beck and out towards what's now the A59, but anyway, the road following the raised ground above the flooding River Aire valley. And I'm showing you this little plan here of our buildings, starting with, there in its nice medieval lettering, the Old Hall. And I'll draw your attention, first of all, to the fact that in this illustration, I say 1894, a vitally important map, of course, the building described as Old Hall is actually shown as two separate ranges, with an interesting space in the middle. And its location is of interest because it looks out onto an enclosed area, which is the medieval village site of Carlton. Partly now still a deserted medieval village, the church and churchyard, of course, standing in the southeast corner of that area. So that's the sort of shape of the village, and this is the Old Hall that we're going to look at now. And here it is again in 1853, as I showed at the start, and complex of buildings, two, again with a space between them, and then a branching sort of L-shaped wing projecting out to one side. And here it is. Can't beat a good air photograph, can you? It's looking again at this range of two buildings. This is a photo taken in the 1980s, the two separate elements, and we're going to look at what is known as the barn, or the southern section, and then at the northern section here. And all of these outbuildings in the forecourt of the hall site have now been cleared away. And I think for the archaeologists amongst us, you can rest your eyes a bit on the earthworks of the medieval site that I was referring to earlier. A very brief amount of history. Whilst you look down a long view along the main street through, which we saw on the first slide, my opening slide of the group of children. They'll feature again, by the way. But the view is down towards the building as we see it today. And some brief notes that the name that features, the family name, is the Ferrand family. We have early references to Godfrey de Alta-Ripa, or also Dotry. An interesting comparison of spelling. I like de Alta-Ripa. That's your Latin, is it not? From the other side, the far side. In other words, a description written in Skipton that describes everybody at Carlton's on the other side. And Dotry, of course, it also is Dotre, that's the other in French. So hunting box, the Ferrand family living here by 1584, which we'll see the evidence for. And that family devastated by the death of Thomas Ferrand, son and heir, in 1648 at the Battle of Preston. We've got Martin Lister, is a notable, if not quite a native, someone who married into the family at the manor house in the 17th century, and went on to write the definitive work on spiders, which is a whole other story as well. We also come across Peter Garfield, a speculator, an entrepreneur in the time of the early stages of mill ownership and mill development, rather, looking to people with skills in wool working, spinning and weaving, and adapting it to cotton, which we'll come back to. And then we get the period, that massive period of enclosure, and the Ferrand name remains, but the manor and the lands around the old hall become into the ownership of the estate at St Ives in Bingley. And it's a description I always have of asset stripping, which of course we do see so often in our historic buildings. And then a change as the building goes out of use into use for cattle and storage in the 20th century, and a return in recent years, 20 years ago, into residential use. I mentioned at the beginning that there are two blocks, a south and a north block at the old hall, and a missing section. And here we can use the wonderful resource of early photographs to identify that. Two of our little people as well, who pop up around the village. Photograph, yes, dated about 1910, some maybe, that might be 1905 or so, that sort of date. And some of the outbuildings in the forecourt in front of the old hall building range. And drawing your attention to the date stone in the gable wall, the photograph taken in about 1910. That date stone, when the wall collapsed or was systematically demolished, the date stone found its way to St Ives in Bingley. So I invite you sometime when you're there. I think you can get around the grounds still when the time's right. And you can see Carlton's Old Hall great date stone in one of the boundary walls. This is a drawing of the date stone, a not very good drawing, but it's there all the same. Very important to have these sort of sources of information. And I've used Dawson's History of Skipton, his reference to the Old Hall here, to describe a little more of the details. The Ferrand family, variously called janitors, key keepers, warders or stewards of Skipton Castle, so a prominent family. Custodians of the castle gate, a role that they held in perpetuity. And by the 16th century, there are records of the family as wool merchants with a house in Cornhill in London. And a description in 1882, which is always, you know, of interest. This once pretentious residence of it, nothing now remains save the mouldering walls, which sort of begs the question about whether it was roofless. Certainly we can see from photographic evidence just 20 odd years later that those walls were certainly mouldering at that time. But in 1882, that epigraph still very visible on the east front, and a drawing made by J.A. Busfield, who was a member of the family, a curate at the church, and the family again from Bingley, so linked with St Ives. So here it is, this maid, William Ferrand and Elizabeth, his wife. It is the 4th of April, 1584. So a very valuable source of information about the condition of the building, what remained, and what gives an indication of what was likely to happen to it. That's going on. So here's a photo that I took in 1986 when I began working in listed buildings. We were given a camera and endless amounts of black and white film, and every now and then I'd have the end of film to use up when I got back from, I was in the Harrogate district when I was list reviewing. So odd photos of mine come up in a sort of murky black and white tone. This is therefore that southern block. The missing gable is on the right, in the daylight on the right-hand side. And we find we had a visit from the Yorkshire Vernacular Building Study Group in 1971 and another in 1979 to examine the building. But we find that, in fact, it was quite difficult to have access to quite a large part of the building. But the description is very interesting, very important to have that from what is now a pretty long time ago and just before I moved up to live here. And this is the plan that was drawn. I should have drawn your attention in the previous slide to the sort of slightly wavy ridge on the roof there, a really nice indicator when you're spotting buildings of possible early structure. And it's a Barbara Hutton drawing. She was in the team doing the work there. And she describes a series of blocked openings, a substantial fireplace in the back wall of this barn. The barn door, which I hope you noticed as we looked in the previous slide, the wide barn door, but absolutely nothing to see inside but the sort of scars on the walls to indicate where there might have been a staircase, where there were blocked windows, possibly blocked doorways, but an overall feel of the building reduced indeed to that shell that was referred to in 1882 and in use as cow byres and a hay barn by the farmer. And there wasn't access into this area, which is where I'll bring you to in a moment. This is the report, the notes on the report. This building was built as a house. There's the flat arch with a dripstone over, a doorway hidden by a lean-to and a wooden outshut on the right. So this is in this area here. Fireplaces, ground and first floors at gable ends, sort of, and indications that it was certainly at its later stage of occupancy was floored throughout, but with a lateral chimney stack and this large segmental arch fireplace, blocked mullioned windows, and then this great variety of roof trusses, two collar trusses, two king posts, and an open truss cusped on the underside. So a very strong indication, of course, that we've got a building that's been dismantled, completely reduced to its essentials to continue in use in farm buildings, but retaining those hints of earlier occupation. But this is the doorway that was not accessible and visible. And I'm sorry, it's a very overexposed photo, but this is what I managed to get at a stage before it was vacated by the farmer. And I can just show you, I think if you can look carefully, lower right hand side at the indication of very weathered moulding, roll mouldings. It's a shallow arch with a flat hood to it, and carved in the corners there in the reveals. Yeah. Okay. And here it is now restored in the building as we see it today. Barbara Hutton and the team, their conclusions was, of course, the building was essentially a late medieval remains. There were late 17th century king posts, later collar trusses, but she said the shell of the house might be older, with the conversion to a barn at an early date. And so I'm able to confirm, having been there and taken that photo and seeing this this building restored, that it is, I think, a high status house. The Ferrans making a very good marriage, William Ferran to Isabella de Altarepa, in about 1455, and that the form of that doorway is paralleled at the courtyard at Skipton Castle, which gives us a late 15th century date for some of the core there. So plenty of evidence for it and plenty to consider. I can't see the text on this one, but anyway, this is the northern block. So our missing gable is sitting here in the skylight and the tree there. And what a complex elevation this is and was. Can you see just, it's partly hidden by the outbuilding, but bottom left-hand corner and beyond the gate, a round arched, again, very weathered, round arched entrance. We've got changes to openings all the way through. Most notably on the first floor, the insertion of a taking in door or loading door, farm use, possibly and other use as well. And of course, mullioned windows, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 light mullion windows with mullions removed, sort of classic development of these early window forms. And then on the gable end here, can you see just in the gloom on the right hand side, another taking in door. So this has been a fascinating building to see, and little snippets of historical information give us an indication that this was actually a property. Once the building in the 18th century was being reduced to farm use or asset stripped, as I would say, it came to the attention of Peter Garfield and John Sidgwick, who were very much involved with the construction of some of our earliest cotton mills through the district. 1785 for Skipton's mill, and Belbusk, and acquaintances and friends or business friends of the Slingsby family, which we'll come to in a moment. And here's a really nice drawing elevation of that building. So we have very good firm record of how the building looked in its 20th century, sort of by the mid 20th century. I was able to get upstairs on this upper floor on the right-hand end, and was very interested at the time to see a flagged floor, tremendously strong timbers, of course, on the supporting them, and plastered floor. So that immediately made me think that we were looking at something related to textiles, perhaps to willowing, protecting the floors from sparks and so forth. So the Garfield link with and mill ownership is certainly supportive, excuse me, of the use of the building for some very early industrial purposes. And there's evidence elsewhere in Carlton of this development in the later 18th and very early 19th century of the skills in woolen spinning and weaving being developed and brought into the cotton sphere. Upper windows were shown. Here's the plan, which I hope you can make, you can see clearly. And that little round arched window, doorway that I pointed out in the last, in the elevation slide, went nowhere in the 20th century. It's evidently part of that 1584 gable that that we are missing. So the history and the building becomes of interest as a proposition to develop it again and convert it back to residential. So here we have archaeologists working within that southern block, the barn building, and remember me mentioning that arched fireplace. And if you just look there, you can make out that lateral stack that Barbara Hutton refers to, the ground floor fireplace, large ground floor fireplace. Here as well, you can see efforts made in the 20th century using breeze blocks to support the roof on a great column in the front of it. So excavations took place. There was cobbled surface, a medieval pottery found outside this on the back of where the stack was. The stack itself had been demolished. So it had just been reduced to a thin wall, as it were, in the back of that fireplace. And there was a very heavily burned area in the centre of that floor. But to my understanding, there wasn't any indication of partitions or screens or whatever to be found. And here is Carlton Old Hall as it was being transformed. And this is taken from the deserted village site. And I'm pointing out to you in the centre, just visible above that screen fencing, which was running along the side, obviously, of course, of the roadway. There's the doorway that came to light as work was in progress. Apart from that, there's the remains of outbuildings being demolished. There's now garaging on one side there. A gable end of the barn, and in progress is the development of the space or building between the two, north and south block, to bring it to the building that we see today. So here we are. This is as you come through the village, and there's that indication and some good quality stone, and in the centre a date stone which indicates 1584 and 2002. So I hope you found that interesting. We've certainly watched that building being transformed, and of course the sources and resources we've got as an archive group are just fantastic. This is just touching on the amount of paperwork and photographs and so on that come to light. So sorting through that has been quite an exercise, very enjoyable to do. And I'm going to flit across the village now and take you to something quite different. We've just watched a building of great antiquity and seen it completely transformed, changes of use, changes of circumstance, as it were. And so let's look at a building which we can celebrate as one that is on its original site, on a prime site, as it were, on the edge of the village. Of one build, plenty of history about it, and some rather lovely local oral history, as well as photographs. So this is introducing you to Spence's Court in the middle here. It's a lovely view from the church tower with its courtyard plan and its gate piers on this sort of the back side, as it, and standing close to, or standing surrounded by the original gardens area for those who lived there. And here's just to show you where it is in the village. It's on this principal road coming through. It looks out at Skipton. It's certainly not hiding itself. It's very prominent indeed. And it is a focus for a whole series of footpaths to and from the church, out into the fields, through routes, and obviously on the through route. So visible people living here, always very much in the centre of what's going on in the village. And two photographs just taken the other day to give you a close-up. These extraordinary elaborate gate piers and very fine wrought iron work of the gate, but quite forbidding insofar as there's an overthrow between those two gate piers with, you know, neat set of teeth on the top of it. Definitely a site, place to be protected, place to feel secure once people were through that gateway. And a whole series of fine windows now with tall openings, quite a lot of evidence in the surrounds, the jambs of possibly enlargement and alteration, and a need for perhaps more light that was not much available originally. And this view, opening the gate and walking in, shows you a courtyard area with a very unusual set of a galleried form with timber rails around it, a pair of double doors at the far side of the courtyard, which opened into a chapel and dining room originally. And we see a building that's had a whole series of restorations and is known, as I say, by the name of Spence's Court today, being founded by one Ferren Spence. This, just looking at the map first, the 1893 map shows you very clearly the layout or plan with that courtyard entrance. I hope you can see it all right, with 1, 2, 3 rooms, sets of rooms on each side, on each floor. So it's a total of 12 residents altogether living at the hospital, and a central entrance, communal room. And here we've got a village, you know, oral history. It's wonderful, wonderful to get, and we catch it and record it. And here's this village story of how we came to have this substantial almshouse. Ferren Spence is variously described as a local man, a London merchant, a businessman. He variously fell from his horse or got lost on the moors at some stage and was taken in by an elderly woman in Market Bosworth, near Market Bosworth in Leicestershire. And in gratitude for that, he founded the hospital here at Carlton, 6 residents to be from Carlton and 6 from Market Besworth, men or women. So intriguing. We have a wonderful site, looked after still, and sets of photographs, and an opportunity to look at his will, the will of Ferren Spence, which describes him as of the General Post Office in London, the will being dated 1698, the construction of the almshouses by 1707. He left his personal estate to Sir William Bowes and 4 other people, one of them his cousin, and he wanted to be built here and endow a hospital for poor people, and again from Market Bosworth and Carlton. So he always left with that slight question, was, why do they always have to come all the way up from Market Bosworth to live in Carlton? However, there have, of course, been various times restoration work has been done. The previous photo is the oldest one we have, which I think is possibly about 1885. But there have been improvements and of course still run by the trust. But one thing that stands out to my mind is that it was originally rendered. And we can see in this photograph, here's our group of people again, come to watch what we're doing. The rendering is causing a problem. And a piece in the newspaper referred to the decrepit state in around 1905 of the building. There's a scheme to pull down and rebuild with improvements in the sanitary arrangements. And of course, the original building would have had privies outside. It would be a great pity to take down this unique building and erect an ugly one instead. I love that quote. But it didn't happen. Instead, donations and funds came in through the later 19th century and through the 20th century. And I think when you look at the building, don't you love the chimneys, the chimney stacks? Very much, I think, a reminder these original rooms will have been fueled by peat fires, 1696, 1707, early 18th century almshouses. It would almost certainly have been peat fires. So getting a draft through would always have been a question. So these immensely tall chimneys are a huge part of the character of the building. What's really notable in this photograph is how brilliantly new the chimney pots are. So there's definitely been a good deal of expenditure by the turn of the 20th century to make improvements. And of course, there were alterations being made to the plumbing as time went on. And we have here 6 women, because it did become a women-only almshouse, I think, for a spell. Okay, so there we got a photograph with renewed chimneys. And one of the donations, a very substantial donation to the fund, was £18,000 bequeathed by Agnes Vardil Niven for improvements. And those plans were being considered in 1905. Well, I think those chimney pots in the previous one suggest that that money had been probably well spent to improve the place and presumably put in better plumbing. Memorial inside at Carleton. I've just lost the top of this description because it's telling us just a minute. Well, I think I can say it anyway. This is the main front. This is if you're arriving from Skipton, the facade of the building. And as you see, it's long ago lost its render. And incidentally, long ago lost a number of its chimneys. But to the family were let, Ferenc Spence left hundreds of pounds in bequests to members of his family, and money for mourning rings, both to his family members. His mother was still alive, 2 sisters, neither of them married, a cousin and an aunt. So at least five women in his family would have been probably affected with his death financially. So he was considering them as part of his bequest. And he is also leaving bequests to colleagues at work, which is a clerks at the post office. He commissioned his trustees to put up, to buy land in order to obtain a rent to be able to pay. I mean, it was a hugely complex commission. And his will says, wherein I ordered to be built a convenient almshouse or hospital for the perpetual entertaining and habitation of indigent poor people, one half whereof shall be from time to time to review the small poor people of Market Bosworth, and the numbers not necessary to be fixed until his estate value has been settled. So very businesslike, huge commission, and I'd say it was all fulfilled by 1707. And this is just, sorry, a little bit out of focus, this photograph, but I've come around the corner in the gardens just to show the a little bit of the improved plumbing has gone in. So we've got kitchens and bathrooms for all of the residents. There are fewer residents now, of course. There are 3 on each. Is it? There might be just 2 on each floor now. And an outbuilding which provided tool sheds and an extension to the facilities for a warden in the that central building, which still applies, of course. So it added a kitchen facility and so forth in the 1950s and 60s. And there's an inscription on the wall of the hospital. And we can see its prominent position. It wants to be visible. Carlton Hospital and Spence's charity. It perpetuates the memory of Ferenc Spence, and it has benefited from donations through 1872, Agnes Niven, Jessie Blossom Colthurst of Gargrave House, formerly of Ravenshaw and Colton, in 1955. So we've got everything, haven't we? I mean, what more could you want? We've got old photograph. What a stunning photograph, taken in around 1930. And there's that entrance, the previous photo. Sadly, we don't have any of this architectural detail any longer. Did it fall off? I don't know. Anyway, for some reason it was decided necessary, possibly a substantial amount of rebuilding the inner walls in the 1950s. We can see in 1930 that all the bolts, the ironwork indicates very clearly that the 1707 timber work was probably substantially replaced, probably in that sort of 1905 when they were doing the chimneys as well. How much of the original? Well, this wonderful, he had architrave, big moulding, heavy moulded surround to it, and a group there of the ladies posing in a very interesting way, presumably staring animatedly at Warden, who's perhaps a new resident. And the building in the middle, which I referred to as originally being a sort of communal area, dining and used as a chapel in 1707, became the laundry. And I suspect that this was the time when the laundry was in use. And thankfully, on the back of this photograph is a handwritten description, written wonderfully by one Marjorie Taylor, who was alive and writing a lot about the village in the 1980s and maybe into the 90s. And she was able to say each lady, elderly lady, 12 in all, had a single all-purpose room. The double door at the back led into a room with a mangle and a boiler for washing clothes. So there's our 1930 laundry, and out into the garden allotments. And then there are now 8 places, a bed sitter with a kitchen and bathroom, and the utility room is converted into a flat for the warden, who checks each morning that all is well. So what a wonderful resource. Plenty of information, plenty of historic information, a description, somewhere to be cherished. And what Paul and Diana did a set of research projects into Ferren Spence and obtained documents relating to the foundation, including his will. So that's my waffle has just given you a moment to try and read the text here. In the name of God, amen. There's his name, Ferren, and there's Spence there. That's IT for item. I, Ferren Spence, of the General Post Office in London, Esquire, being sick and weak in body, and I've transcribed it there. All my stock and money. So here is his first paragraph, and I've already indicated that he's giving his donations of money to maintain his family and acknowledge his friends. But it begs this question: what does that mean of the General Post Office in London? And that opened up an enormously interesting story. This is Ferren Spence, the man who may or may not have fallen off his horse at Market Bosworth and been taken in by an elderly lady. And it brings us to that period of huge political and social and ecclesiastical upheaval in the later part of the 17th century, following the restoration of Charles II. And this is my apology for a stream of I just ran out of ideas about how to display this because it's so interesting. But this period, and you bear in mind he's writing his will in 1696. His father actually was an Anglican priest who married Dorothy Ferrand, hence his Christian name, Ferren Spence. Dorothy Ferrand was of the family affected by the Battle of Preston and the loss of that young man at the Old Hall. I think it's his sister, Dorothy. But Abraham, Ferren's mother, had married Abraham, and they moved to Market Bosworth. And in fact, that was where Ferren Spence was born, and as were his brother and 2 sisters. He was the younger brother. And for all of his young life, Ferren's family life was threatened by all the legal challenges that were made to his father's livelihood, because we're in a period when to have been ordained priest during the Commonwealth made you subject to challenge and condemnation following the Restoration. And so he had to defend his place. However, I suspect that he'd made a very good marriage to Dorothy Ferrand, and so they were probably well resourced. I don't know the circumstances, but he had bought himself into Market Bosworth, which was the most valuable living in Leicestershire. He did in 1668 obtain his royal patent to preach, and as the rector, sorry, it's my misprint. Meanwhile, son Ferrand was at Jesus College in Cambridge, but his father died in 1671. It seems likely that he then perhaps couldn't afford, or whatever decision he decided to leave. His brother, incidentally, had been ordained priest as well, and had found himself preaching on the wrong side, as he preached against the Pope shortly after the accession of James II, and had to recant and was affected mentally, it's clear from the brief accounts that I've read. So again, Ferrand's upbringing was one of completely unsettled and considerable disquiet, I think I'm going to say. And so Ferren Spence leaves Cambridge and travels. He goes abroad. He is certainly in Sweden. He seems to be over in Italy. And he began translations of French historical novels and publishing them in London. So if you're looking at trying to make sense of my presentation here, the left-hand side, I try to sort of give a few dates and sequence of his life. And on the right, just examples. So this first translation was called The Unequal Match, or The Life of Mary of Anjou, Queen of Majorca. So substantial novels written in French, translated from the French original, brought to London, published, found a market. And interestingly, that the dedications, of course, are very highly significant, often very cryptic, because they are indicating particular allegiance and begging for sympathy and influence from people that receive those dedications. And it's interesting that, oh, sorry, that's me. The Unequal Match was dedicated to Elizabeth Thanet, a member of the Clifford family. I think that is Lady Anne Clifford's, one of her daughters, who married Nicholas Tufton. So we're seeing links, although born in Market Bosworth, goes to Cambridge, travels abroad, he's still linking up with family, probably through his mother, Dorothy Friend, and that circle. So he writes about 6 novels, including Instructions to a Young Nobleman and so forth. I think you see that. He was a linguist, he was terrifically well-travelled, and he became a translator and a spy. And his work, why he was called of the Post Office in London, was because he worked in the post office on a quarterly salary, as I show here, by 1687. He was given £10 a quarter as a clerk of the Foreign Letter Office. And he could very possibly have developed his skills immediately that took him into intelligence and counterintelligence in the courts at the time of the build up to the Glorious Revolution and the Jacobite cause being forwarded in France, of course. He was in Antwerp at the time of the Battle of the Boyne, and in the mid-1690s, he was in the secret office, a key intelligence figure, he's described, following the movements of the exiled supporters of James II. He tracked aliases and translated the encoded documents being sent through Antwerp and Brussels. And this is the final slide for Mr. Spence. Sorry, it's a bit strange, but I just felt we needed a change from other backgrounds. This is a scene of Bath, in Bath. A few contemporary descriptions of him. Mr. Spence, employed in the secret affairs of the post office, should be paid an allowance, though no good character of him has yet been heard, says Sir William Trumbull, writing to the Earl of Portland, who's a close advisor to King William. So you can see him in this. You picture it as an inner room. You've got the post office sorting all of the manuscripts, documents coming through from Europe into London, and then a clutch of them being recognized through handwriting, through coded names, pseudonyms, and taken into an inner room where they're opened by Mr. Spence and a few others, read, interpreted, information put into reports, and then forwarded to the court to advise of what movements are going on. It's absolutely fascinating. And one of this says, you know, tell Mr. Spence I've long expected him an alphabet. That's the list of the pseudonyms. It seems to have been involved behind this failed Jacobite plot in 1696. But his health failed, failing very quickly. He's described as being at Windsor, travelling out of the city when pain and discomfort became too bad. I know that neither know any here, nor does any know me. And he refers to the fact that his solitary life, his secretive life, means that he is not at all well known. And he went to Bath for the waters in 1699, made his will, and in it gave the bequests that result in our amazing almshouses. And I think the description the lasting impression I've got is of somebody who lived a completely secret life, somehow manages to make something extremely flamboyant, although he didn't, I mean, whether he ever drew a picture of what he wanted, but left to Sir William Trumbull and others to sort out the design of the almshouses. But it's, and it sits, and when it was rendered, and when it was slightly pale pink as well, you know, you couldn't have missed Fair and Spence's name. So that is the end of that story. And I'm coming up, I think, now to our final of the 3 buildings in Carlton. And I'm moving on to something entirely different on the other side of the village. I'm referring to it as a hidden house for reasons that will become obvious, I hope. And I'm standing with my back to Dale House in this picture, looking over at the converted cotton mill built by or for William and John Slingsby in 1862. You can see the pitched roof of the 3 pictures of the major cotton spinning and cotton production, and the chimney there. And here's its location for those of you not familiar with the village. We've been across to the east side and looked out at Skipton. We're now going to stand and we're looking very much into the village. Its location, its main front now is facing east, and this map shows you the layout of the village when Dale House was looking out onto fields, enclosures, and the back of the Swan Inn. The Swan Inn being a property of the Slingsbys in the 17th century. The Slingsby family developed their farming and cattle rearing business into a major droving and rearing business, with properties, land all over the area. Particularly well known is the East Riddleston Hall estate. They rented the East Riddleston Hall estate and raised the Craven heifer there. So the Slingsbys, a family, very sound business people, looking by the end of the 18th century, early 19th century for a place to develop. And they're here in Carlton. And staying with the building, here it is slightly earlier in 1841. Sarah Slingsby was living here at Dale House, to just show you just in this point here, and just to indicate that there is, it's effectively a sort of shallow L shape in plan, south facing. And this, well, obviously we've touched on the vernacular, of course we have, in particularly the northern block at the Old Hall with its mullioned windows. This is where I start to picture what there might have been on this this building here. But in 1841, it could be part of it's recognizable today, looking out, as I've said, over some nice gardens with a turning route for the carriage coming into the front of the house, a barn, possibly access here into fields, but certainly in control of some substantial areas in the immediate vicinity. And it has a boundary to the roadway. Right, sorry, it's the arrow. Can you see the line of Carlton Beck running through centre here, and Townley Bridge, which is still obviously clearly visible today. It's But the house appears to me, looking at this map, to be looking onto a very narrow route with a sort of slight curve of the beck, which we don't really see today. The beck is very much a culverted, straight route across to another bridge, which is just showing at the top of this picture. So they're looking out graciously over their grounds here from this very pleasant house, oval drive and garden. And the smithy, this is the smithy at Townley Bridge, is shown in this, say, 1841 tithe map. So very much part of the business area of the village, but in a gracious residence for the Slingsby family. Cattle dealers moved into cotton mill ownership. And the previous slide, 1841, and the 1850 Ordnance Survey both show that sort of shallow L plan. But by 1894, and here this wonderful map gives us the plan again. Can you see? I'm indicating it just there. The core of the building has been expanded with an extension on its southern side by 1894, with a little projection on the corner, which we'll see in a moment. And the length of the long side of the building, northern side, has also been given a small extension on forward northwards, and we'll see that in more detail. Now, I've called it a hidden building. Oh, sorry, another picture. There you are. The plan now. And we can see, well, 1894, after that, no, the next, oh, mixed woodland. Yes, sorry. This is reminding me to just point out in 1894 that we can see along here a very clearly defined area, between 1850 and 1894, the smithy has gone, and there's been a rather smart layout of trees into a narrow area. And my impression is, tell me if I'm making this up, that the stream has been culverted and straightened, and we see that in the stonework of the stream itself. So it's an interesting area, and it's perhaps a diversion from the building itself, but this is about its heritage significance and the setting, because I think looking at the as it were, the garden wall, as the building is recessed back behind this wall set away. I think it's been deliberately reduced and the wall's set up high. You can't see into the grounds, so it's reflecting the typical treatment of major landowners' properties, from the very big estates, from ha-ha walls, from hidden railway tracks and so forth. We have a little example of it here in Carlton, as well as having a remarkable little group of trees now known as the plantation on the left-hand side, on the left-hand picture here, and survival of a number of evergreen trees, fir trees and so on, although again, in the fullness of time, we're beginning to lose those. And here is a glimpse of the hidden house. For various reasons, not yet able to get some elevation, clear elevation photographs. But if you can bear with me, in the right-hand side, we're looking at an entrance door, which we'll have a photograph in a moment. A symmetrical facade, three bays of tall sash windows, and then a central doorway with flanking sash windows there. And then to the left of it, a much later block. In fact, the gable that you can see here is about 1980. So a projection forward, an enlargement of the 19th century house, which was added to Dale House in 1891. So I'm still unclear in my mind about quite what a date we've got for the nice symmetrical sort of classical looking building. But it sits, and as I say, set amongst some marvellous mature trees. And round the back, it's perhaps the plan in here, but I've taken you round the back to that first north-facing wall that's on the 1850 map, and an extraordinary date stone. Be very grateful for comments on style and so forth. This is you see a very elaborate, almost a script-like K, J and D, 1732. K, we're thinking at the moment is for Kitching, John and Dorothy Kitching, the date 1732. I'd like to be able to say that was the date of their marriage and moving in, but actually it's the date that Dorothy Kitching died. So I'm left thinking there was a remarriage to a Margaret Stevenson, I think. So I'm interested in that. But however, we're looking at the north wall of the oldest part of this building, and I rather think this is a completely reset and repositioned piece of a date stone. And the next picture will show you roughly where it is within the north wall of the oldest part, as I say. That inscription is just tucked away up above this wide opening with divided, yes, sides to the construction. And I'm just going to incite the archaeologist and the sort of early vernacular interest in that to the left. So I'm sorry, the awkward photos, this is proved difficult. To the left of, so you can see the door sill there, is that door sill there. Huge boulder foundations are in this former external wall. It's now within a sort of porch come passage entrance to the building. So we've got 1735 for part of this, this hidden building. And if we go further around the back, though, we have the wide gable of that building. That's a continuation of the wall with the date stone is coming out into this position here. And an extraordinary strange block added on, which is not there as far as we can see. I mean, trusting the Ordnance Survey from 1850, but is there by 1894. A square block, it looks like a bull house or something sort of agricultural, but it's attached to the building. Also, I think you'll see here, can you see a sort of change in the construction at this sort of position? In other words, has this all been added on as an extra sort of mock tower in some way? But it's square section, very plain, and these very sort of basic stone surrounds, a wide-ish doorway at the base. And lo and behold, there's a finial, which, you know, you can get quite excited about finials. However, a close-up photo and look at that shows that it's actually a 19th century version of a finial, but maybe it's one of those nice quirky jokes. You know, the owner said, yeah, we've done a lot to this place, but we recognize it has an ancient character to it. We've got a rebuild likely. Well, we know there was a lot of rebuild going on, extending the services to Dale House and adding bedrooms and added an added story and a finial. So going right round the back, again, we have the conundrum of the pre-1841 house. There's the 1735 building, or the one with the date stone within it in an odd position. A huge kitchen block, which is very clearly of a new build in 1891, and the rear of a very smart house being built, again, which shows clearly on the 1894 Ordnance Survey. And here we introduce William Cecil Slingsby, and I'm in my last 5 minutes or so. Going on. The house itself, the one that we peeked at through the trees, has this very pleasant classical door surround, probably pre-1831, sort of Greek key pattern. However, those margin lights look a bit 1891 to me. And there's a central hall entrance with some very nice staircase, shallow treads, a cellar below, a shallow vaulted cellar with big stone meat slabs within it. And the wear and tear on this, the staircase sort of tells me that there's a lot of old structure in it, but then a close look at a lot of it shows it can be completely new or replicated. So I'm still working on trying to see whether there's anything early in these. I mean, by early, I mean trying to push sometime in the middle of the 18th century for end of these spindles, but the design is just a bit local. There's something about it's known as a column on Vars baluster. I can get quite carried away with these. There's your little vase at the base. There's your classical column, and but the capital has gone peculiar at the top. So is it a local version? It's certainly made on a lathe, on an old style lathe, because those are knops. Those are the fixings for the length of timber that could be worked. So a very interesting staircase within the house. Before 1831, certainly, just quite where it sits, I'm not sure at the moment. So that's the old house there. And then next door is a round arched entrance. So this is overlooking the beck. Sorry, I'm on the left-hand side. That's the entrance. And by William Cecil Slingsby, who in his diary said, "I'm enlarging my house." And some dates are coming up in a moment. And this is the best of the photographs I'm able to get at the moment of the southwest corner bay, which is shown. I hope you can just remembering back to the 1894 Ordnance Survey again, the tiny projecting corner turret. So it's got all the feel of a sort of Victorian gentleman's residence tacked on to the much rather older country house. And here's the person responsible for works at Dale House in the 19th century. And we're picking up on the Slingsby family at the cotton mill. He's the son of the mill's founder, and he ran the cotton business with his cousin until 1909. He lived here at Dale House. That's in the complete building. In other words, the Victorian, the 18th century and 1735 and so on. He lived here after his marriage to Alison Eckroyd. And he was an explorer and mountaineer in Italy and Norway. Now, if we were in a big room, I'd be able to say, everybody show of hand, anybody who knows this name, who's a mountaineer or explorer, but he is internationally known and certainly very much revered in Norway. He made a solo climb of Store Skagastolsting. I practiced that this afternoon in 1876. It was a national sensation. It does read a little bit as if you found it, which of course you have to be careful with. And I'm sure it can't have been solo, because if you did a solo climb, I would know you'd been. So there's more information evidently about his climbing. He learned Norwegian. He made over 20 visits to explore Norway. It's all there. He had an audience with the king. He was more familiar with the company and lifestyle. And it's a nice moment for anybody who likes vernacular architecture to have a good stare at that fireplace as well, isn't it? I mean, it's clearly in a building in the room's corner, but as I understand, this is a photograph of him in Norway, so need to search for origins elsewhere. But just to bear in mind as well that his wife went in with him when he was identified glaciers. He touched on some of the, rarely or if ever conquered peaks in Norway. And he wrote his book, which I'm just going to hold up for you. This is a new recent edition. Well, it's a online edition you can have printed. He published it in 1904. interesting to bear in mind that Norway became a country independent of Sweden in 1905. So his involvement in Norway would have, and his explorations would have attracted a lot of attention from the whole nation. And we see that he was familiar with the king and so on, and so forth. And he wrote his books here at Dale House. And when he moved uphill, when his father died, I think that was 1897, he moved up the hill. He continued with his interest, well, right up until his death in 1929. His book was published in 1984. It was republished in 1941, an interesting date given wartime situation in Norway, invaluable for travellers of all sorts. So we have a very interesting family living there in a complicated house. He lives there on his own, but he decides to rent it out. He moved up to the big house at Beech Hill up the road when his father died. And at the same time, the big house, Beech Hill House, was built in 1862. The view was blocked from Dale House by this enormous textile mill that was being built. And I'm going to hazard an interpretation that it was William Cecil who would have initiated the planning and replanting and work around the front of Dale House to screen it, to reflect his interest in the wild moors and trees of Norway, Scandinavia, and his travels in Italy as well, apparently. And we know that the building doesn't get subdivided until the 20th century. Changes were being made as he puts it up to rent out. He's moved out in December 1897. Sorry about but I hope you can see here that it's describing 3 sitting rooms and 9 bedrooms. This is the complete building that we've been exploring for the last few minutes. And both Dale House and Loftburn, the rear wing became Loftburn by 1910. Dale House was uninhabited in 1911. That's just presumably between rented occupiers at the time. And both parts of the building were sold in 1922. He died in 1929 and is buried in Carlton churchyard. And we see visitors, mountaineers, climbers. His name is just internationally known. This is a building that was the owner of Dale House and split it into 2 houses in 1950, so that Greek revival doorway was separate from the round arch doorway. Separate buildings, it worked quite neatly, and then the grounds were sold off. So we see that change in the 20th century as buildings change in their value, as social conditions change. The grounds of Loftburn was sold and a house was built in 1970. And as we speak, there's a reuniting of the 18th and 19th century. The hidden house is being brought together again as 2 houses. Loftburn continues to exist, but the frontage is going to become a single building. So that's drawing me to, I think, a conclusion on the hidden house and its occupiers. And I think, time to draw to a halt on 3 Carlton buildings. Just to be thankful it wasn't 4. Just would have gone all night. But I hope you've enjoyed a tour around quite a variety of people and structures, which you recount a piece of history about a settlement, and it perhaps sometimes is the same old about who inherited what and who was lord of the other. But to go into individual cases reveals extraordinary personalities and extraordinary circumstances. I hope you've enjoyed it. thank you for coming to
Absolutely brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you.